The date was October 23, 1944. In the dark forests of Belgium near the German border, Wehrmachtkid soldiers huddled in their defensive positions. These were hardened veterans, men who had fought across Europe, from the frozen steppes of Russia to the deserts of North Africa. They had seen the best and worst that war could offer. They had faced British regularity, Soviet brutality, and now they waited for yet another American unit to test their mettle. But something felt different this time. The intelligence reports filtering through German headquarters spoke of a new American division. The 104th Infantry Division, they called themselves, the Timberwolves. Fresh troops from the United States never tested in combat. The German officers smiled. Green American soldiers, probably farm boys and factory workers who had never seen real war. This would be easy. They had broken American units before. What these German soldiers did not know was that these Timberwolves were commanded by a man they would soon learn to fear. A man whose very name would become a warning, whispered among Wehrmacht troops in the darkness. A general so aggressive, so unconventional, so utterly relentless, that his own high command had fired him once already. His name was Terry Dearmier Allen. The Americans called him Terrible Terry, and he was about to teach the Germans a lesson they would never forget. The story of how this happened, how one American general became the nightmare of German forces across 2 continents, is not just about military tactics or battlefield victories. It is about a man who refused to follow the rules when those rules got his soldiers killed. A man who drank too much, cursed too freely, and cared more about winning battles than wearing a clean uniform. For a man who was fired in disgrace at the height of his success, only to return more dangerous than ever. To understand why German soldiers feared Terry Allen, we must go back to where it all began. Terry Allen was born on April 1, 1888, at Fort Douglas in the Utah Territory. He came from a military family that stretched back generations. His father was Colonel Samuel Allen, a career Army officer who had spent his entire adult life in uniform, moving from post to post across the American West. But the military tradition ran even deeper than that. His maternal grandfather, Captain Carlos Alvarez de Lame Mesa, had fought for the Union at Gettysburg, one of the most savage battles in American history. Captain de Lame Mesa served with Company C of the 39th New York Volunteer Infantry, a unit known as the Garibaldi Guard, composed largely of Italian immigrants who had come to America seeking freedom and found themselves fighting to preserve it. On July 2, 1863, during the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, Captain de Mesa was wounded in the intense fighting around the peach orchard and the wheat field, where thousands of men fell in a few hours of combat. He survived his wounds and continued to serve until the war ended. This heritage of service and sacrifice ran through Terry Allen's veins. Military service was not just a career in the Allen family. It was blood. It was destiny. It was the family business passed down from generation to generation, from the Civil War through the Indian Wars to whatever conflicts the 20th century would bring. Young Terry grew up on military posts across the American frontier. He learned to ride horses before he could properly read. He learned to shoot before he mastered arithmetic. He was a child of the old army, the cavalry army, the army that still thought wars would be won by men on horseback charging across open fields. This would shape everything about him, for better and worse. In 1907, Terry received the honor every military family dreams of, an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Here was his chance to follow in his father's footsteps, to become an officer in the grandest tradition. He failed spectacularly. Terry Allen hated West Point. He hated the endless mathematics. He hated the rigid discipline. He hated sitting in classrooms when he wanted to be doing something, anything other than studying. He stuttered in class. He earned demerits for minor infractions. His classmates nicknamed him Tear around the mess hall Allen because of his restless energy. The academy was built for men who could sit still, follow orders, and memorize textbooks. Terry Allen was built for action. In 1911, he was dismissed after failing ordnance and gunnery. Having been held back earlier for failing mathematics, most men would have given up. The shame of failing at West Point was enough to end military aspirations for good, but Allen was stubborn. If the traditional path would not work, he would find another way. He enrolled at Catholic University of America in Washington. He studied, he worked, He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1912. On November 30th, 1912, he received his commission as a second lieutenant in the cavalry of the United States Army. He had made it, not through the front door, but through sheer determination. This pattern, this refusal to accept defeat, this willingness to find another way when the official path was blocked, would define his entire career. Allen served as a cavalry officer on the Mexican border in 1913. One day, Lieutenant Allen led just 6 soldiers against 30 Mexican cattle rustlers who had crossed into American territory. Military doctrine said to wait for reinforcements. Allen attacked. He captured or killed all 30 rustlers. This was not the action of a careful-by-the-book officer. This was the action of a man who saw what needed to be done and did it. Consequences be damned. Then came World War I. Allen desperately wanted to get into the fight. He feared, like many young officers, that the war would end before he could prove himself in combat. When he finally shipped out to France in 1918, he was not leading a combat unit. He was assigned to the 315th Ammunition Train attached to the 90th Division, hauling artillery shells to the front lines. Not glamorous, not what he wanted, but he was there and that was what mattered. Eventually, Allen got his chance. He was assigned to command the 3rd Battalion of the 358th Infantry Regiment, 90th Division. He led his men into battle at Saint-Mihiel in September 1918, and later in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, the largest battle in American military history. It was here in the mud and blood of the Western Front that Allen developed his signature tactical innovation: night attacks. Most commanders avoided night operations. Too confusing. Too much risk of friendly fire. Too easy for units to get lost in the darkness. The 12 standard doctrine taught at military schools was to defend at night and attack in daylight, when you could see the enemy and coordinate your units effectively. Allen saw something different. He noticed that night attacks, when properly executed, resulted in fewer casualties. The statistics from his own combat experience bore this out. Daylight attacks against prepared positions produced horrific casualty rates. Machine guns could see their targets clearly. Artillery observers could adjust fire precisely. Defenders had clear fields of fire. But at night, all those advantages disappeared. The element of surprise saved lives. The confusion that made other commanders nervous actually worked in favor of the attackers. Defenders could not see what was coming. They could not coordinate effective responses. Artillery fired blindly, often hitting nothing. And most importantly, defenders were terrified, firing at shadows and sounds, wasting ammunition and breaking under the psychological pressure of an enemy they could not see. Allen developed specific techniques for night operations: careful reconnaissance in daylight, detailed briefings where every soldier knew exactly what to do, simple plans that could be executed even in complete darkness, prearranged signals using whistles or flares, designated assembly areas for reorganization. He taught his subordinates that complexity was the enemy of night operations. Keep it simple, know your objective, moved silently until discovered, then hit hard and fast. On October 24, 1918, Allen was shot in the face with machine gun fire during an attack. He was tagged for medical evacuation. Allen persuaded the doctors to return him quickly to duty. He stayed with his men. He kept fighting. This was not bravado, this was leadership. His soldiers saw their commander, blood streaming down his face, refusing to leave them. What message did that send? We are in this together. I will not abandon you. Follow me. For his actions on October 24th, Allen was awarded the Silver Star. He also received 2 Purple Hearts for his wounds. The war ended. Allen returned to the United States with a reputation as a brave and capable combat leader. But now came the hard part. 20 years of peacetime Army life. The years between the wars were brutal for ambitious officers. The Army shrank from over 4 million men in 1918 to barely 130,000 by the mid-1920s. An entire generation of officers found their careers frozen. Promotions stopped almost completely. Men who had commanded battalions in combat found themselves stuck as captains for a decade, sometimes longer. Some resigned in frustration. Others drank themselves into obscurity. The best, like Allen, waited and prepared. Allen was no exception to the promotion freeze, but he made the most of those lean years. In 1920, he competed in a 300-mile horseback race through central Texas, a cowboy versus cavalryman competition designed to test both horse and rider to their limits. Allen completed the brutal ride in 101 hours and 56 minutes, winning the contest and proving he still had the endurance of his frontier cavalry days. That same year, he won a bronze medal in polo at the 1920 Summer Olympics in Antwerp, Belgium, representing the United States as part of the Army equestrian team. He was a cavalryman through and through, a horseman of the old army, skilled in a form of warfare that was rapidly becoming obsolete. But Terry Allen was also watching the world change around him. He studied military history obsessively. He read everything he could find about World War I, analyzing what had worked and what had failed. He studied the German army, their tactics, their organization, their doctrine. He followed developments in tank warfare, aviation, and radio communications. He understood that the next war would be different from anything the cavalry had prepared him for. Horses would not matter. Mobility, firepower, and combined arms coordination would decide battles. Most importantly, Allen never stopped training his men hard, always preparing for the war he knew would eventually come. Whether he was commanding a training unit or stuck in a staff position, he pushed for realistic field exercises, aggressive tactics, and high standards. While other officers marked time and counted the years until retirement, Allen prepared himself and anyone he could influence for the war he knew was coming. Then, on October 1, 1940, everything changed. General George C. Marshall, the new Army Chief of Staff, was rebuilding the American military as war approached. Marshall had a gift for spotting talent. He looked at Lieutenant Colonel Terry Allen and saw something others had missed. Marshall promoted Allen directly from Lieutenant Colonel to Brigadier General, skipping the rank of Colonel entirely. This was almost unheard of. Marshall insisted on the promotion, despite opposition from subordinates who thought Allen too rough around the edges. Marshall saw what mattered. Allen could lead men in combat. Everything else was secondary. In May 1942, Allen received the command that would define his career. The 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red one, the oldest and proudest division in the American Army. Marshall himself described Allen as outstanding, as a leader who can do anything with men and officers. Allen was about to prove Marshall right. On November 8, 1942, the 1st Infantry Division landed at Iran, Algeria, as part of Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. This was the first American offensive operation in the European theater. Allen led from the front, as always. The division took 418 casualties in the initial landing, including 94 killed in action, 73 seriously wounded, 170, 8 slightly wounded, and 75 missing in action. But they secured their objectives. The Americans were in the fight. The real test came in Tunisia. The campaign in North Africa was brutal. The Germans under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel were experienced desert fighters who had been winning battles since 1941. The Americans were new to this kind of warfare, learning lessons in blood. In February 1943, German forces launched a massive counteroffensive at Kasserine Pass. American units, many inexperienced and poorly led, broke and ran. It was a disaster. German tanks smashed through defensive positions. American equipment was captured or destroyed. Entire battalions retreated in confusion. The Germans nearly split the Allied forces in two. For the first time, Americans were tasting real defeat at the hands of an expert enemy. On February 21st, Allen and General Paul Robinet led a strong counterattack at Jebel al-Hamra. Allen personally directed artillery fire and positioned his infantry to stop the German and Italian advance. His troops captured 400 prisoners and stabilized the line. The disaster was contained. The lesson was learned. American forces could stand and fight against veteran German units, but only with the right leadership and the right tactics. Then came Elgar in March 1943. This would become Allen's defining battle in North Africa. The Germans attacked with tanks. On March 21st, Allen's division fought through 21 days at what he later called the grueling Battle of Elgar. Day after day, German tanks probed for weaknesses. Day after day, American infantry and anti-tank guns beat them back. The fighting was savage. Men fought in 100-degree heat with limited water. Artillery pounded both sides. Casualties mounted. On March 23rd, the crisis came. German tanks broke through the forward positions and threatened Allen's headquarters. Staff officers suggested pulling back to a safer position. The suggestion made tactical sense. Divisional headquarters were not supposed to be in the direct line of fire. But Allen understood something his staff did not. If the headquarters pulled back, the forward units would see it and might waver. Morale, especially in inexperienced troops, could collapse in an instant. Allen's response entered military legend. "I will like hell pull out, and I will shoot the first bastard who does." The headquarters stayed. Allen walked outside and watched the German tanks approach. His calm demeanor steadied his staff. Forward units, seeing that even the general was standing his ground, held their positions. American tank destroyers and artillery engaged the German armor at close range. The attack was repulsed. The line held. Elgatar was more than just another battle. It was the first American defeat of experienced German tank units in World War II. The Germans had met an American commander who would not retreat, would not panic, and would keep fighting until they broke. Allen had proven that American troops, when properly led and trained, could beat the best the Wehrmacht had to offer. In May 1943, the 1st Infantry Division led the final drive on Tunis. Combat ended on May 9th. 4 days later, on May 13th, nearly 250,000 Axis troops surrendered. The North Africa campaign was over. The Big Red One had taken 2,000 casualties in the final 17 days of fighting. Some companies were reduced to 50 men, but they had won. Now came Sicily. On July 10, 1943, Allen led the 1st Infantry Division ashore at Gela, Sicily, in Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. General George Patton had specifically requested the 1st Division for Gela, correctly assessing it as the most difficult landing zone. The beach was exposed to counterattack from multiple directions. German and Italian forces were positioned in the hills overlooking the landing areas. If any division could handle it, Patton believed it was the Big Red One under Terry Allen. The landing went well initially, but the real test came the next day. On July 11th, German tanks from the Hermann Göring Panzer Division counterattacked toward the beach. If they reached the shore, they could split the beachhead and roll up the Allied positions. American infantry, caught in open terrain, fought desperately to stop the armor. Artillery from ships offshore fired over the heads of American soldiers to hit the advancing tanks. Naval gunfire, combined with fierce resistance from Allen's infantry and supporting units, finally stopped the German advance just short of the beach. Omar Bradley, who was there observing the fight, later wrote in his memoirs, "I question whether any other United States division could have repelled that charge." The Big Red One held. The beachhead was secure. The invasion could continue, but the beat-hardest fighting was still ahead. The Sicilian campaign became a race between Patton's 7th Army and British General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army to capture the island. Both commanders wanted glory. Both pushed their men hard. Allen's 1st Division was given some of the toughest objectives. Then came Troina, one of the most savage battles of the Sicily campaign. Troina was a mountain town that controlled key roads through the interior of Sicily. The Germans had turned it into a fortress. From July 31st to August 6, 1943, Allen's division attacked this stronghold. The fighting was brutal. Every building had to be cleared. Every street was covered by German machine guns. American infantry attacked uphill into prepared positions. Casualties mounted daily. The Germans did not just defend, they counterattacked. Again and again, German forces launched attacks to throw the Americans back down the mountain. By the time the battle ended, the Germans had launched 24 separate counterattacks over 6 days of continuous fighting. 24 times Allen's men beat them back. The division artillery fired thousands of shells. Infantry companies were reduced to half strength. Medics worked around the clock, but the Big Red One kept attacking, kept pushing forward, kept grinding down the German defenders. Troia finally fell on August 6th. The road to Messina was open, but the cost had been heavy. The 1st Infantry Division was exhausted. The men had been in combat almost continuously since landing in North Africa 9 months earlier. They needed rest. They needed replacements. They needed time to rebuild. On August 9, 1943, Time magazine published its latest issue. On the cover was Major General Terry Allen. The article praised him as a great division commander in the making who was gaining a personal luster. It celebrated his victories in Tunisia and Sicily. There was one problem. On August 7th, 2 days before the magazine hit newsstands, Omar Bradley had relieved Allen from command of the 1st Infantry Division. The reasons were complex. Bradley believed that Allen and his assistant division commander, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., had let disciplines slip. The Big Red One had become elite, confident but also somewhat arrogant. Bradley felt the division needed tightening up. Allen was replaced by Major General Clarence R. Hubner, but there was another factor, recent. Scholarship suggests the relief was pre-planned by General Dwight Eisenhower and Patton before the Sicily campaign even began.